Welcome to the deep dive. This week, we're really plunging into the intensity surrounding the Sean Combs trial.
Yeah, it's been quite something.
Week 4 just wrapped, and it brought this real mix of incredibly serious allegations, some very raw emotional testimony, aggressive legal moves from the defense, and frankly, some really unexpected details popping up.
Definitely. It's a lot for anyone following along to keep track of.
Absolutely. And trials like this, especially with charges as severe as sex trafficking and racketeering, they just generate this massive wave of information.
It's immense. And trying to figure out what's truly crucial, what's corroborating what, versus what's just sort of the background noise of a courtroom, it can feel overwhelming.
Totally. And that's where we come in. That's our mission here for this deep dive. We've dug into the recent reporting, specifically looking at articles from Fox News and Rolling Stone.
Right. Sources that have been covering the day-to-day testimony and the evidence presented this past week pretty meticulously.
Exactly. So our goal is to help you cut through all that noise.
Yeah.
We're going to unpack what seem to be the most significant revelations from week 4.
Yeah, looking closely at the specifics, what was actually said on the witness stand, what evidence was shown, trying to get to the key takeaways without you having to read every single daily report.
Precisely. It's about understanding what actually happened in court this week.
Okay, so let's set the scene. Week 4. The trial started back on May 12th.
Right. And Combs is facing these federal charges, sex trafficking, racketeering, very serious.
And this past week, several key witnesses took the stand, each one kind of adding a different layer or maybe posing a new challenge.
Who did we hear from?
Well, there was testimony from a woman identified only as Mia, who's a former assistant to Combs.
Okay.
We also heard from Derek Ferguson. He used to be the CFO for Bad Boy Entertainment.
The financial angle.
Exactly. Then Brianna Bongalon, who's described as a close friend of Cassie Ventura. She gave some very difficult testimony. And then there was another alleged victim, referred to in court as Victim 2, using the pseudonym Jane.
So a range of perspectives.
Yeah.
And the information itself, it really spanned the gamut, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. From, like you said, deeply disturbing personal stories to, cold, hard financial records, bank statements.
Text messages too, right? Lots of communication details.
And even evidence that was apparently pulled from electronic devices seized in those raids back in March.
Wow. So it really was a week showcasing all the different kinds of evidence the prosecution is trying to weave together.
Definitely. And also how the defense is pushing back, trying to pick apart that narrative. You had the very human emotional side, right alongside the sort of objective data of bank statements and digital trails. Each piece is meant to build this complex picture for the jury.
Okay, let's start with Jane, Victim 2, the second alleged sex trafficking victim to testify.
Right. And the prosecution is framing her experience in a very specific way, which is important. Sex trafficking by fraud, that's the term they're using.
Okay, what does that mean here?
Yeah.
Based on what she testified?
Well, the reporting suggests Jane testified repeatedly that she continued these sexual encounters, sometimes involving other people. Not because she was, physically forced initially.
Right.
But because, and this is according to her testimony, she loved Combs. She genuinely wanted that one-on-one time, that connection with him.
Okay. So where does the fraud part come in?
The prosecution's argument, based on her testimony, is that this emotional connection, this desire for a more traditional relationship, was allegedly manipulated. That it was sort of defrauded by Combs, leading her in participating in behaviors. She later said she wanted to stop. She testified she kept doing them because they'd become tangled up with her ability to just maintain the relationship she wanted.
That's complex. And she mentioned something about opening Pandora's box. What was that referring to?
Yeah, that phrase came up in her testimony. According to the report, she described an event back in May 2021 referred to as a freak-off. She felt that event, engaging in that, was the moment things fundamentally changed, that it opened this Pandora's box. And afterwards, these negative, unwanted behaviors started to dominate the relationship.
And those behaviors led to what she called hotel nights.
Exactly. That's the term she used, hotel nights.
What did she describe those as? What did they entail?
She testified these often involved spending long stretches of time, sometimes 24 hours straight, in hotel rooms.
Right.
And she alleged these rooms often had this red lighting, this red hue. During these times, she testified, she was expected to have sex with male escorts.
And these escorts were brought in for Combs.
For Combs' sexual gratification, according to her testimony, yes.
And did she say she tried to stop this?
Yes, she did. She claimed she tried to express her discomfort, her desire to stop these specific hotel nights and the activities involved.
Did she say how she tried to communicate that?
She testified she told Combs how she felt multiple times, both, talking to him directly and also through text messages.
And his alleged response. How did she say he reacted when she tried to set those boundaries?
She alleged he was dismissive, just brushed off her feelings. And according to her testimony and how the prosecution presented it, he would allegedly leverage the financial support he was providing her.
Okay. Like what kind of support?
Things like paying for her apartment or living expenses, even cosmetic stuff like paying for her veneers. The claim is he'd bring that up when she pushed back or said she didn't want to do something.
So using the financial dependence as leverage.
That's the allegation, yes.
Yeah.
And there was one specific text message read in court that seemed to really crystallize this alleged dynamic.
Okay, what did it say?
This was reportedly from August 2023. Jane was apparently pushing back against participating in what was called an all-star night, which allegedly involved 3 men.
Right.
And Combs's reported text response was, "Well, get over it, please.
Wow.
Look at the roof over your head and that pretty smile. I don't want to do anything if that's still an issue. Let it go. Love you."
Look at the roof over your head. And that pretty smile. That's incredibly pointed. What's the alleged implication there, based on her testimony and the prosecution's framing?
Well, Jane's testimony and the way the prosecution argued it frames this as direct manipulation. Coercion, essentially. By mentioning the roof, her housing, and the pretty smile, tying back to the veneers he allegedly paid for the text, is presented as him reminding her of that financial support.
Right.
While simultaneously dismissing her feelings. Get over it, please. Let it go. It suggests that her value, maybe his willingness to continue the relationship and the support, was tied to her going along with the sexual activities she was trying to stop.
So it directly reinforces that sex trafficking by fraud idea. The coercion isn't necessarily physical in that moment, but it's emotional, financial pressure.
Exactly. Leveraging the relationship, the power imbalance, the financial dependency against her stated wishes. That's the core of the prosecution's argument for this specific charge regarding Jane.
It really highlights how complex these charges can be. It's not always about physical restraint.
Right. It can be about alleged psychological manipulation, emotional control, exploiting that power dynamic. And the reporting mentioned Jane was very emotional during this testimony, crying frequently on the stand.
Yeah, understandable. And in contrast, the reports noted Combs seemed largely unfazed.
That was the observation reported from the courtroom, yes. And it also came up that the Judge Arun Subramanian, had actually warned Combs earlier in the trial about his reactions.
Oh, really? What for?
Apparently, he was seen nodding vigorously at the jurors during the cross-examination of a different witness. So the judge warned him. It just underscores the judge trying to keep things proper, prevent anything that looks like trying to influence the jury improperly. Even though it happened earlier, it was mentioned again in this week's reporting.
Got it. Okay, back to Jane's testimony. There was also audio played, right? That seems like a potentially huge piece of evidence.
Yes, that was significant. For the first time, the jury heard audio that was described as being recorded during one of these freak-offs involving Jane.
So not just testimony about it, but an actual recording.
Exactly. Presented as capturing a moment of the alleged activity itself.
What could be heard on the recording?
According to the detailed reports, you could hear Jane's voice asking a male escort who was allegedly there for Combs to wear a condom.
Okay.
And then Jane testified Combs interrupted her request. His voice was apparently audible on the recording.
What did his voice sound like?
Described in the source as sounding thick and slurred, with music in the background.
And Jane offered her interpretation of what Combs said when he interrupted her.
Yes. The prosecutor, Maureen Comey, asked her directly about it. The quote from the reporting was something like, "Jane, when Sean said, 'If you don't touch yourself right now,' what did you understand he was saying?"
And Jane's understanding was?
She replied, "I understood he was saying, if you don't, just move on from this and just forget about it."
Wow. So essentially, ignore the condom request and get back to the activity.
That's how she interpreted it and how the prosecution presented it. That audio, coupled with her interpretation, it seems incredibly significant for their case.
Yeah, it moves beyond testimony to something tangible the jury can hear.
Exactly. It's direct evidence. Presented as capturing Combs' alleged voice, his alleged directive, right in the middle of one of these alleged hotel nights, immediately after she tried to assert a boundary about safety.
So the prosecution is likely arguing this directly corroborates her whole description of these events and his alleged control.
That would certainly seem to be the argument, yes. It's concrete evidence for the jury to weigh against her testimony and the defense's cross-examination.
Okay, let's pivot now to another key witness from this week, Brianna Bana Bongolan, described as a close friend of Cassie Ventura.
Yes, and her testimony was also deeply disturbing. She described an alleged incident from September 2016.
Where did this allegedly happen?
On the balcony of Cassie's apartment in Los Angeles, a 17th floor balcony.
17th floor. Yeah. Okay, what did she allege happened?
Bongolan testified that Combs cornered her out there. She claimed he then lifted her up, physically lifted her, and held her over the edge of the balcony, dangling her over the edge.
For how long?
She estimated about 15 seconds, and she testified he was yelling at her while doing this.
Yelling what?
Reportedly yelling, "You know what the F you did."
That is terrifying. Just imagining that.
She described being absolutely terrified for her life, trying desperately to hold on, not slip.
Did she allege any physical injury from this besides the terror?
Yes. She said after he pulled her back onto the balcony, he then threw her into patio furniture.
And the impact? Physically, emotionally?
She testified about bruising, yes, and also pain in her back and neck afterwards. But beyond that, she spoke about the profound emotional distress.
I can only imagine.
She said it led to night terrors and paranoia and screaming in sleep, just conveying this deep, lasting psychological trauma.
Was there any physical evidence presented related to this alleged incident?
Yes, she showed the jury a photo. She testified it was a picture of the injury she got that night.
What did the photo show?
Described as a large purple bruise on the back of her leg, and she said it had a puncture wound in the center.
Okay. But this testimony, and specifically that photo, became a major focus for the defense, right?
Right, absolutely. A huge point of contention during cross-examination. The defense team went hard after that photo.
How so?
They focused on the photo's metadata, the digital information embedded in the file.
And what did the metadata show?
It showed the photo was taken on September 26, 2016.
Okay.
So the defense then presented their evidence, other photos, hotel records, which they claimed proved that Sean Combs was actually in New York City on September 26, 2016.
So he couldn't have been on a balcony in L.A. throwing her into furniture if he was in New York.
That was precisely the defense argument. The attorney, Nicole Westmoreland, reportedly said it was impossible for him to be in two places at the same time.
A direct challenge to her timeline, using her own evidence as timestamp against her.
Exactly. It created this significant discrepancy. How could the incident happen in L.A. on the date the injury photo was apparently taken if Combs was documented as being in NYC?
How did Bongolan respond when they confronted her with this discrepancy on cross-examination?
Well, when shown the evidence suggesting Combs was in New York on that date, she seemed to acknowledge the conflict, at least theoretically. The reports say she responded with things like, "In theory, yeah," and "I can't answer that one."
So she couldn't reconcile the dates right there on the stand?
Apparently not. However, and this is important, when the prosecution came back on redirect examination, she doubled down on her certainty about the event itself. She stated really emphatically, according to the reports, "I have no doubt, and I will never forget him holding me over the balcony."
So sticking to the core accusation, even if the photo date was questionable.
Yes. She basically said, "I might be fuzzy on the exact date the photo was taken or how that lines up, but I know this happened, and I know he did it."
But the prosecution didn't just leave it there, did they? They brought in something else to try and support her story afterwards.
That's right. After Bongolan finished testifying, the prosecutors presented another piece of evidence, a text message.
Okay. Between who and when?
The text was reportedly from September 2016, and it was between Cassie Ventura and Christina Coram.
Combs' chief of staff, right?
Exactly. And in that text message, Cassie Ventura apparently mentioned that she had learned about the alleged balcony incident involving Bongolan.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, even if the photo date had issues, this text suggests the incident itself was being discussed by Cassie and Combs' chief of staff back in September 2016.
That's the prosecution's argument. They're using this text to say, look, regardless of the photo metadata confusion the defense is focusing on, the serious event involving Bongolan on the balcony was known and discussed in Combs' inner circle during that same time frame.
So it's corroboration for the event happening around that time, trying to sidestep the specific date issue of the photo.
Precisely. It's an attempt to bolster Bongolan's credibility about the core event by showing it was a topic of conversation contemporaneously, aiming to lessen the impact of the defense's date challenge.
This whole situation really leads us into the legal maneuvering happening outside the testimony itself. The defense filed another mistrial motion.
Yes, their second motion for a mistrial. Filed over the weekend after week 4 finished. It's a big deal, asking the judge to basically halt the trial entirely.
On what grounds this time? What did their letter say?
According to the reporting, they argued that Bongolan's balcony testimony was demonstrably false in key respects, pointing directly at that date discrepancy.
Okay.
They called her testimony disturbing and powerful evidence that was used improperly to prejudice the jury against Combs, and they went further.
How so?
They accused the prosecution of exacerbating the harm by allegedly suborning perjured testimony. Meaning, they accused the prosecutors of presenting testimony, Bongolan's timeline, that the defense claims the prosecutors knew, or should have known, was false. It's a very serious accusation against the government attorneys.
Wow. And this second motion tied back to their first one, too?
Yes, they referenced their earlier attempt to get a mistrial. That first one involved testimony about the Kid Cudi car incident, the Molotov cocktail.
Right, and the missing fingerprint cards.
Exactly. The mysteriously destroyed fingerprint cards from Kid Cudi's door after that firebombing attempt.
And the defense's argument about those cards was? What again?
In this new letter, they reiterated their claim that the government's motive all along must have been to suggest that Mr. Combs had corrupt influence over the LA authorities when it tried to create the impression that he was responsible for the destruction of the fingerprints. They're painting a picture of alleged prosecutorial misconduct across different parts of the case.
So they're trying to connect the dots, the alleged issue, with Bongolan's timeline, the alleged implication about the fingerprints saying it's a pattern.
That seems to be the strategy. Arguing that these instances, taken together, constitute alleged prosecutorial misconduct, serious enough to warrant stopping the trial, because, they argue, Combs can no longer get a fair hearing.
A bold move. Has the judge ruled on this second motion yet?
As of the latest reports we have, no. Judge Subramanian hadn't issued a ruling, so that's hanging over the trial right now, a major point of legal tension.
Okay, now shifting back to evidence. Christina Coram's name came up again, Combs' chief of staff. But this time, evidence from her devices was actually used.
Yes, and this is really significant. Coram has been mentioned before, obviously, as his longtime right hand, but this week was the first time prosecutors actually presented evidence obtained from her electronic devices.
The one seized in those raids back in March?
Reportedly, yes. The raids on his homes in LA and Miami.
Can you give an example of how that evidence was used in court this week?
Yeah, a really clear example came up during the testimony of a man named Eddie Garcia.
Who is he?
He's a former security guard from the Intercontinental Hotel. Garcia testified about an incident back in March 2016 where he allegedly helped make a hotel videotape disappear.
A videotape related to Combs?
Related to events involving Combs, yes. And the prosecution then showed evidence found on Christina Coram's devices.
What kind of evidence?
Photos. Specifically, photos of the documents Garcia signed related to this alleged incident with the videotape, and also photos of his driver's licenses that he apparently turned over at the time.
So, documentation related to Garcia allegedly helping make a video disappear, found on the phone or device of Combs' chief of staff.
That is exactly the connection the prosecution seems to be drawing. By showing these specific documents related to Garcia's alleged actions were stored on Coram's devices, they're linking her directly to that alleged effort.
Implying she was involved in potentially concealing evidence.
That's the strong implication, yes.
Right.
It suggests her alleged participation in activities related to managing or potentially suppressing damaging information.
And this, the use of her device data, raises a huge question, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. The sources highlighted this looming question. Will Christina Coram end up testifying for the government against Combs?
That would be massive.
Huge, given she was reportedly his right hand for over a decade. And adding fuel to that fire, just before the jury left on Friday, prosecutors apparently referred to her in open court as an agent and a co-conspirator of Mr. Combs.
Whoa. Calling her a co-conspirator in front of the jury?
Well, reportedly before the jury returned, but stated in court. Designating her like that strongly suggests the prosecution believes she was actively involved in alleged illegal activities with him. So her potential testimony, or even why she might not testify, becomes a major point of speculation now.
Okay, let's shift to another powerful combination we saw this week. text messages paired with financial records.
Yes, this was really compelling. It offered a glimpse into private communications and then showed how money actually moved in ways that seemed to back up earlier testimony.
There was a specific text exchange highlighted between Combs and his security guard, D-Rock.
Right, a string of texts from September 13, 2015 that were entered into evidence.
What was the apparent context for these messages?
It seems they were exchanged shortly after some kind of physical fight or altercation between Combs and Cassie Ventura. D-Rock was essentially giving Combs updates on Cassie.
What kind of updates? What did the text say?
D-Rock texted Combs things like, "Cass is calling studios looking for you," and "She keep asking for you. I told her to chill out and said you were feeling bad about what happened." He also mentioned giving her an ice pack.
Okay. And Combs' response to hearing this?
Combs reportedly texted back instructing D-Rock, "Stay on top of Cassie." He also asked if her eye looked better and how she was doing.
Then D-Rock mentioned Combs' son seeing the injury.
Yes.
Yeah.
D-Rock texted that Justin, presumably his son, saw Ventura's eye, and D-Rock said he covered for it, telling Justin it happened because a fight broke out last night in the club.
And Combs' alleged reply to D-Rock saying he covered it up that way.
The text read in court was reportedly, "Why does she not have herself hiding?"
Why did she not have herself hiding? Just hearing that phrase, in the context of an apparent injury after a fight, it lands heavily.
It does. Based purely on the text and the context given in court, it shows Combs being told about an injury after an incident, and his reported immediate reaction or question focuses on why the injury wasn't concealed.
Suggests concern about appearance management over her well-being in that moment.
That's certainly one interpretation. The prosecution likely wants the jury to draw from that specific phrasing, yes, focusing on hiding it rather than her condition.
And those texts also mentioned another woman, right, referred to as G.
Yes, earlier in that same exchange from September 2015, Combs reportedly told D-Rock to get in touch with someone called G.
Any instructions about what to say?
Tell G he wants to talk to her. And he also referenced the big concert that weekend.
Which concert was that?
Identified in court as the iHeart Music Festival, where the Bad Boy Family reunion performance happened.
Okay, how might this reference to G in September 2015 connect to other testimony?
Well, earlier in the trial, we heard testimony from Cassie Ventura, from Mia, the ex-assistant, and from a stylist named Deontay Nash.
Right.
They all testified about Cassie discovering Combs' alleged affair with a woman named Gina. That discovery happened in October 2015 when Cassie was in South Africa.
So the timing is close. September texts mentioning G and a big event. October discovery of an alleged affair with Gina.
Exactly. So while not definitive proof, the prosecution could be suggesting that this September text about contacting G potentially relates to the woman later identified as Gina, given the timing and the initial.
Interesting connection. Now let's link this to the financial records. Derek Ferguson, the former Bad Boy CFO, testified.
Right. His main purpose seemed to be authenticating bank records, providing that rare peek, as the source called it, into Combs' finances.
He focused on a specific statement.
Yes, a bank statement from December 2011. It was for an LLC linked to Combs' former home in Alpine, New Jersey.
What did that one-month statement show? December 2011.
It showed a lot of money moving through that account, over $3 million flowing in and out just in that 1 month.
Wow. Any specific examples?
Yeah, the reports mentioned things like single-day deposits hitting up to $800,000. Money coming in from various Combs businesses like Combs Enterprises, which gets funding from that big Diageo partnership.
Okay. And big outflows, too.
Like a $500,000 payment to the Barbara Gladstone Gallery. Suggests significant personal spending or investment happening through this account tied to his home.
But the really key transactions on that statement involved Cassandra Ventura, right? Specifically, $20,000.
This is where the financial records became incredibly powerful corroboration for earlier, very emotional testimony.
Okay, lay out the sequence from the bank statement.
First, on December 14th, 2011, the statement shows a $20,000 wire transfer going out of Combs' account to Cassandra Ventura.
Okay, $20 to Cassie, then what?
Then, the very next week, the statement shows $20,000 being wired into Combs' account.
From where?
The source of that incoming wire was listed as Ventura's parents.
From Cassie's parents. Okay, this connects directly to testimony from Regina Ventura, Cassie's mom, doesn't it?
Absolutely, point for point.
Yeah.
Regina Ventura had testified earlier about what happened in late 2011, right after Combs found out Cassie was seeing Kid Cudi.
Right. What did she say happened?
She testified Combs called her directly. He was furious, and he demanded $20,000 from her and her husband.
Demanded it? Why? What was his justification?
He claimed it was money he'd invested in Cassie's music career that he wanted back immediately because of the Kid Cudi situation.
And how did Regina Ventura say they reacted to that demand?
She testified they felt immense pressure and they were scared. Scared for Cassie.
Why scared?
She mentioned receiving an email from Cassie around that time where Cassie claimed Combs was threatening to release sexually explicit videos of her. So, fearing for her daughter's safety, Regina and her husband took out a home equity loan to get the $20,000 quickly.
Took out a loan.
Wow.
That context explains the urgency?
It really does. It paints a picture of why they felt they had no choice but to comply with the alleged demand immediately at significant personal cost.
And this $20,000 incident also aligns with Cassie's own testimony about why she ended things with Kid Cudi and went back to Combs.
Yes. Cassie testified that she felt returning to Combs was the safest option, not just for her, but for Kid Cudi, too.
Why? What does she say Combs told her?
She testified he told her something like, "I'm going to hurt the both of us," implying if she stayed with Cudi, both would face consequences, but if she came back, maybe she could mitigate the harm.
So, the alleged demand for money from her parents, combined with alleged threats, it paints this picture of intense pressure and control around that time.
That's the narrative the prosecution is building, using both the emotional testimony and these financial records.
And the bank record even confirmed the money was returned shortly after.
Yes, the statement showed the $20,000 wire was returned to the sender, Ventura's parents, just days after they sent it.
Which is exactly what Regina Ventura testified happened. Returned with no explanation.
Exactly. So the bank statement, this dry, objective data, perfectly matches the sequence described in the very personal, emotional testimony from both mother and daughter about this specific alleged incident.
It's a really stark example of how financial trails can corroborate testimonial accounts.
It is. The records don't show the fear or the alleged threats, obviously, but they confirm the money moving exactly as described. Combs to Cassie, Cassie's parents to Combs, Combs back to Cassie's parents, all in that short, specific time frame. It lends significant weight to their story.
Okay, now let's touch on something a bit lighter, though still part of the trial record. The celebrity names that popped up.
Right. Happens in these high-profile cases. And it's crucial, as you said before, to stress the sources are very clear on this. None of these celebrities were accused of any wrongdoing at all.
Absolutely a central point. Their names just came up incidentally.
Purely contextually.
What?
Work history, social stories and texts, business comparisons, stuff like that.
Let's run through them quickly, just explaining the specific reason each name was mentioned, based only on the trial reporting this week. First, Madonna.
Madonna came up because the ex-assistant, Mia, testified about where she worked after being fired by Combs in 2017.
And she worked for Madonna.
Yes. Mia said she was hired by Madonna to help lead her film division and restructure her executive team, roles that apparently evolved over time. So just part of Mia's resume, essentially.
Got it. Next, Leonardo DiCaprio and Mick Jagger. Seems random.
These names appeared in a text message Mia sent to Combs years after she stopped working for him. She was apparently reminiscing positively about some experiences.
What did the text say about them?
Mia reportedly mentioned Mick Jagger trying to take me home, but added that she ran away. And she mentioned Leo DiCaprio grabbing her BlackBerry during a high-stakes baccarat game where Combs apparently won big.
So, just anecdotes from the past shared in a text.
Exactly. Part of a longer text reminiscing about amazing stories, which the defense actually used to try and contrast with her earlier testimony about negative experiences. Just incidental social details.
Okay. Beyonce and Rihanna. How did they come up?
Their names were mentioned during Brianna Bongalan's testimony. She was talking about a clothing line Cassie Ventura had with Diamond Supply Company.
And the connection was?
Bongalan reportedly agreed with the defense lawyer that the line didn't ultimately succeed commercially because they were competing against huge established names in fashion.
Ah, like Beyonce and Rihanna.
Exactly, who had also released collections around then, so purely a business context, explaining market competition for Cassie's venture.
Makes sense. Judd Apatow.
His name also came up in a text for Mia to Combs. This one was sent in March 2019 after Kim Porter had passed away.
And the context.
Mia had sent Combs condolences. In a separate text that day, she recommended he watch the Netflix show Love, mentioning Judd Apatow created it and calling it Superbad-esque funny.
Just a casual TV recommendation.
Yep, exactly that.
And finally, Chadwick Boseman.
Boseman's name came up in a text Mia sent Combs in 2020, after Boseman's death. Mia was referencing a time she worked intensely with Combs on a production when he was auditioning for the James Brown movie role.
The role Bozeman famously got.
Right. And according to Mia, Combs texted back asking if she still had the audition tape from that time.
So, again, just referencing a shared past professional experience related to a role Bozeman ultimately played.
Correct. Completely tangential to the trial's core allegations, just part of a documented conversation.
It really shows how wide-ranging trial evidence can be,
Yeah.
pulling in these incidental details from people's lives and communications.
Yeah, it illustrates the granular level things can get to. Sometimes these details provide context, sometimes they're used by one side or the other to try and build or challenge credibility.
So, looking ahead from week 4, what was expected next?
The reporting indicated that the testimony of Jane, her direct and cross-examination, was expected to continue into the start of the next week. And there was also an indication from the prosecution that they might actually rest their case sooner than they first thought, maybe wrapping up in less than the originally projected 6 weeks.
So, potentially moving faster than anticipated.
Yeah.
This past week, though, just incredibly dense.
It really was. A huge amount covered. You had the really difficult emotional accounts from Jane and Brianna Bongolan. Then you had the defense pushing back hard, challenging timelines, filing that serious second mistrial motion alleging misconduct.
And the concrete evidence, the financial records backing up the Ventura testimony, the data from Coram's devices hinting at potential involvement in other matters.
Plus all those surprising incidental details like the celebrity names popping up. It's a lot.
A huge amount for the jury, the legal teams, everyone involved to process. And again, this deep dive is based only on what was reported in the sources covering this specific week of the trial.
Absolutely. Just the reported facts from court.
So as you think about everything that came out this week, the raw testimony, the defense challenges, the financial data, the texts, maybe consider how all these different types of evidence get woven together.
Yeah. How both sides use emotional stories, objective records, private messages, all trying to construct a convincing narrative for the jury.
And think about the challenge for that jury. They have to weigh these incredibly personal, sometimes traumatic, accounts against defense arguments about inconsistencies or motives.
They have to parse financial data, interpret text messages presented out of context, perhaps, assess the credibility of every single person on the stand.
It's this monumental task, isn't it? Sifting through this incredibly diverse stream of information, trying to separate truth from fabrication, memory from mistake, all to reach a just decision based only on what they saw and heard in that courtroom.
A truly immense responsibility.